Woodward and Lothrop was a department store chain that opened in 1887 and closed in 1995. Thank you for your suggestion.
There's something better than a pot of gold at Woodward and Lothrop. It's a store full of savings. 15 to 50% savings throughout every Woodies store. During Woodies' anniversary sale. Savings on spring fresh fashions for you, your home, and your family. Skirts, suits, dresses, shoes, sheets, tables, and TVs. They're all at 15 to 50% savings right now during the anniversary sale at Woodward and Lothrop, where the rainbow ends and the savings begin.
Woodward and Lothrop, or Woodies as it later became known as, officially opened its doors in 1886. It would be considered to be Washington's very first department store. Samuel Walter Woodward and his business partner, Alvin Mason Lothrop, opened a dry goods store in Chelsea, Massachusetts in 1873 and maintained several stores in the Boston area. Alvin, Washington, D.C. is the place for us, so wrote Samuel Walter Woodward to his business partner Alvin Lothrop in 1879. The young entrepreneurs were looking for a new location for their innovative dry goods store near Boston, Massachusetts. Unhappy with the bargaining common in stores of the day, they were first to charge a fixed price and the first to allow returns. Since the end of the Civil War just 14 years earlier, Washington had new importance as the center of a strong federal government. It had been thoroughly modernized with broad paved streets and avenues, sewers, gas lights, and thousands of new trees. Americans were flocking to the newly important capital to take government jobs and start businesses. Woodward and Lothrop joined them in 1880 and opened their first store near 7th and Pennsylvania Avenue. In 1887, they moved their establishment, now enlarged to a modern department store, to this location, spearheading the development of F Street as the city's premier downtown shopping boulevard. After moving to Washington, D.C., they referred to their first 7 years of Washington business as the impossible years. It was a reference to its struggle getting a new concept going, a one-price store, which in those days was unheard of. Haggling was the way to go, and that's what they didn't like in Boston, but they did it. It wasn't without hard work, but they did it. Contingent upon the move to Washington, the two business partners took on a third partner named Charles Cochran in 1880. In 1886, Woodward and Lothrop purchased Cochran's share of the partnership, and the new store was renamed Woodward and Lothrop. Soon after moving into the historic Carlisle building in 1887, Woodward and Lothrop outgrew its space and began expanding, purchasing the neighboring properties. And by 1897, it occupied almost the entire block, surrounded by 10th, 11th, F, and G streets, northwest. In 1898 and 1902, the buildings were renovated behind a new facade facing G Street. 2 additional floors were added in 1912 and 1913, and yet another building added in 1925. The building attained its lasting form in 1927. It stands 10 stories and once held over 400,000 square feet of retail space. The exterior was decorated in cast iron and leaded glass accents with flower designs and the Woodward and Lothrop monogram. It was declared a DC Historic Landmark in 1964. In the 1920s, it boasted at least 67 retail departments, as well as a travel agency, theater, infirmary, merry-go-round, and traveling arts exhibits. According to one customer, Woodies was truly part of the social fabric, part department store, restaurant, and showcase for talent shows. In 1916, chemistry sets manufactured by Porter Chemical Company made their introduction. Woodward and Lothrop became the first major retailer to offer them for sale, and Chemcraft kits soon appeared at other retailers in the country. The Great Depression was an interesting time for department stores, since this was a time when you needed entertainment. These stores were free entertainment. A lot of places developed their loyalty during the Depression. These department stores actually helped people, but unlike other areas during this time, Washington, D.C. wasn't affected as much as others, and that helped Woodies. By the 1930s, Woodward and Lothrop was like a small city within the greater city of Washington. After World War II, city-based department stores began expanding to the suburbs. Woodies opened a branch in Chevy Chase, Maryland. In the 1950s, the wife of a Woodward and Lothrop buyer saw a demonstration of Play-Doh modeling clay at an educational convention. This led to a successful in-store demo and the sale of Play-Doh in Woodies stores, and soon in toys departments throughout the United States. A dark footnote in Woodward and Lothrop's history was what occurred before the civil rights riots of 1968. Prior to the riots, Woodies was not a very open store. For blacks and whites, they had separate entrances, restrooms, and drinking fountains. That, unfortunately, was the practice, and all these stores basically did it. The one store that catered to African Americans was Morton's. After the riots, business at Woodies dropped about 50% within a few years. At its height, Woodies operated around a dozen stores, but it wasn't long before that empire began to break up. The 1980s were all about mergers, takeovers, and some of those takeovers were hostile. Woodies was susceptible. The businesses were not bringing in the cash, but the real estate was worth something. It became a target of takeover attempts in the 1980s, resisting a leveraged buyout by Ronald Barron in February of 1984, but accepting a $277 million bid later that year from Detroit shopping center mogul A. Alfred Taubman. You had families leaving the department store business, and they needed to survive, so they bring other people to invest and keep the stores going. Taubman had incurred a substantial debt during his 80s acquisitions, which included Wanamaker's department store in 1986, as well as other various properties. The recession of the early 1990s, defense spending cuts, changing shopping trends, lower consumer confidence in spending, led to the perfect storm for Woodward and Lothrop. After the store's big 100th anniversary gala in 1986, Woodies had tried to keep its head above water as long as it could. It was just like, okay, where are we going as a business? How are we going to survive? One analyst said. The writing was on the wall. Woodward and Lothrop, Inc. filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection on January 18, 1994, with $608 million in total assets and $659 million in liabilities. Drastic cost-cutting and increased sales figures did not return the firm to profitability, however, and the chain, including John Wanamaker's subsidiary, was liquidated. On June 21, 1995, 7 of the remaining Woodward and Lothrop locations were sold to JCPenney, and the rest of the Wanamaker's locations were sold to May Department Stores Company. By November of 1995, all Woodies stores had completed liquidation sales and were permanently closed.
It's going out of business. Everything is current and first quality.
And now it's at least half price.
Can't beat it. You ought to be here.
During Woodies' last days.
So what are some of your favorite memories of this place? Leave a comment or a suggestion for a future video below. Be sure to hit that like button. Thanks for watching.